Listen carefully, no one prepared you for this shift. Most men think danger looks loud. They think it shouts. They think it threatens. They think it breaks things in public. But the most decisive shift in a man's life happens without spectacle. No raised voice. No revenge. No dramatic exit. From the outside, nothing appears to change. Inside, the ground splits. Carl Jung understood something that unsettles narcissistic personalities at their core. Not because it turns the empath into a monster, but because it makes him inaccessible. And a narcissist cannot control what he cannot access. There comes a point when the empath is no longer injured, but complete. Not resentful. Not hardened. Not hunting for payback. Complete. The pleading stops. The explaining stops. The hoping stops. Something seals internally. Jung described this as a psychological transmutation, a moment when suffering is not expelled outward but processed inward. The toxin is not thrown back. It is absorbed, broken down, reorganized. What once weakened the psyche becomes structure. What once destabilized the heart becomes backbone. This is psychological alchemy. And when it happens, the empath does not become dangerous in the way the world expects. He becomes immovable. Most people misunderstand empathy. They confuse it with fragility. They label sensitivity as weakness. They see kindness and assume naivety. But Jung saw something else. He observed a type of person rooted in what he called authentic being, a psyche grounded in lived reality rather than appearance. The narcissist lives differently. Not from being, but from persona. From presentation. From reflection. From borrowed energy. The empath experiences. The narcissist performs. The empath feels. The narcissist manages impressions. That contrast determines everything when the empath reaches his limit. The narcissist survives on reaction. Attention. Admiration. Fear. Emotional turbulence. Not in a cinematic villain sense, but unconsciously. Jung recognized this dynamic as a parasitic loop of the psyche. The narcissist does not drain because he delights in cruelty. He drains because he is internally vacant. The empath, by contrast, was never empty. He was overflowing. Overflowing patience. Overflowing forgiveness. Overflowing understanding. Giving explanation after explanation. Offering chance after chance. Extending grace beyond reason. Until one day the current stops. And when it stops, the hierarchy reverses. Jung warned that the most powerful transformation in a psyche is not rage. It is integration. When the empath integrates what he was conditioned to suppress, anger, boundaries, discernment, self-command, he does not become cruel. He becomes clear. Jung described a principle called enantiodromia, the law that when something is pushed to an extreme, it turns into its opposite. Excessive accommodation becomes authority. Endless giving becomes self-possession. Chronic silence becomes presence. And presence is destabilizing to anyone who relies on manipulation. Here is what narcissists never anticipate. The empath does not retaliate. He removes access. No more over-explaining. No more defending his reality. No more arguing facts with distortion. The shift is internal. Invisible. Final. And suddenly manipulation has nowhere to attach. Jung believed this marks the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not nice. Not moral. Not socially approved. Whole. And wholeness does not bargain with dysfunction. That is why a fed-up empath is quiet. He does not expose. He does not campaign for justice. He does not chase closure. He simply withdraws participation from the illusion. An illusion is the narcissist's oxygen. Jung once wrote that the heaviest burden a person carries is the life they never truly lived. The empath has overlived for others. The narcissist has underlived within himself. When the empath stops offering his inner world as refuge, the narcissist is confronted with his own emptiness. That confrontation is intolerable. This is the turning point. The moment when pain becomes information. When suffering becomes architecture. When empathy becomes strength, not strength over others, strength within the self. From this threshold, the empath begins to move through stages Jung mapped long before modern psychology popularized them. Phases of development that culminate in something rare. An empath who cannot be baited. An empath who recognizes masks instantly. An empath who no longer confuses attachment with love or sacrifice with virtue. Jung never used the modern label empath the way we do today, yet he clearly described this psychological type. A person highly attuned to emotional undercurrents, responsive to subtle shifts, oriented toward meaning rather than dominance. What Jung noticed was that this type does not remain static. He evolves. And that evolution follows three distinct movements. Most remain in the first. Many struggle in the second. Very few stabilize in the third. And narcissists fear the third more than exposure. The first stage is unconscious empathy. This is where it begins. The unconscious empath feels everything and understands almost nothing about why. He absorbs moods. He internalizes blame. He assumes responsibility for pain that was never his. He mistakes intensity for intimacy. He mistakes trauma bonding for connection. He mistakes self-erasure for virtue. At this stage, empathy is porous. There are no firm edges because edges feel cruel. The unconscious empath believes if I love harder, explain clearer, forgive deeper, he will change. He identifies with what others refuse to face. He carries projections as if they were duties. And narcissists sense this instinctively, like a predator sensing exposed wiring. They are drawn quickly. The empath listens. The empath mirrors. The empath validates. What he interprets as connection is often projection. The narcissist projects an ideal image. The empath projects hope. Both participate, but for different reasons. Eventually something fractures. Because empathy without self-definition leads to depletion. And depletion forces awareness. That awareness is the beginning of the second stage, the wounded awakening. But that is where we go next. Jung would say that in the beginning the empath is fused with what others refuse to confront. He carries unspoken shame. He absorbs unprocessed anger. He holds emotions that do not belong to him as if they are his responsibility. The narcissist senses this immediately. Not logically. Instinctively. Like an animal detecting exposed circuitry. That is why the pull is so fast. The empath reflects. The empath listens. The empath affirms. He believes he is building connection, but often he is participating in projection. The narcissist casts an image of who he wants to be. The empath casts a vision of who he hopes the other could become. Both invest in a mirage, but for different reasons. Over time the strain builds. Because empathy without identity leads to depletion. And depletion forces a reckoning. That reckoning marks the second phase, the wounded awakening. This is the most disorienting chapter. The empath begins to see that his devotion has been sustaining something that consumes him. Jung called this confrontation with the shadow, not the shadow of the narcissist, but the shadow within the empath himself. The anger he buried to remain agreeable. The limits he silenced to remain loving. The instincts he ignored to remain loyal. Now they surface. Not smoothly. Violently. He swings between compassion and fury. Between guilt and certainty. Between leaving and staying. He recognizes manipulation, yet still feels accountable. He sees the pattern, yet still wants redemption. This is where the narcissist intensifies pressure. Because awareness weakens control. The tactics become sharper. Confusion becomes subtler. Victimhood becomes theatrical. Affection and cruelty rotate like weather. This is not brilliance. It is desperation. Jung understood that once a complex becomes conscious, it begins to lose its grip. And the narcissistic bond is a complex, a repeating psychic loop sustained by unconscious participation. The wounded empath often wonders why clarity does not immediately remove the pain. Because seeing the wound is not the same as healing it. Recognizing poison does not neutralize it. Awareness precedes integration. This stage feels like internal war, but it is also a threshold. Very few move beyond it. The third stage is the sovereign empath. Jung rarely witnessed it fully, yet he respected its structure. The sovereign empath does not abandon empathy. He refines it. He no longer dissolves into another's emotions. He observes them. He does not over-explain. He states once, clearly. He does not chase validation. He trusts his own perception. Here the shadow is no longer an enemy. It is integrated. Anger becomes discernment. Sensitivity becomes strategic awareness. Compassion becomes deliberate, not automatic. And this is what destabilizes the narcissist. The sovereign empath does not react. No emotional supply. No defensive spiral. No collapse. Just stillness. Jung believed individuation culminates in inner authority, not dominance over others, but mastery over one's own psychic energy. The sovereign empath is no longer leaking identity. He is rooted. And rooted men cannot be manipulated. The narcissist senses the shift immediately. Even in silence. Hooks that once triggered guilt no longer land. Urgency finds no entry. Emotional bait dissolves on impact. And suddenly the narcissist is left alone with himself, which is the one confrontation he avoids at all costs. This is where transformation becomes structural. Real change, Jung insisted, does not come from positive thinking. It comes when the psyche reorganizes around truth. Not affirmations. Not willpower. Confrontation. The empath's growth stops being emotional and becomes architectural. To understand this, we must look at individuation as a sequence, not a slogan. What we will call the RISE method is not a technique. It is a psychological progression. Once it begins, it alters everything. The first movement is recognition. Recognition is severe. The empath stops romanticizing pain. He stops isolating incidents and starts seeing patterns. He no longer asks, why is he like this? He asks, why do I remain available to this? Jung emphasized that projection collapses when responsibility returns to the self. This is not self-condemnation. It is self-reclamation. The empath sees that his openness was unbounded, not noble. That his loyalty was misdirected, not heroic. That exhaustion is data. And when confusion dissolves, manipulation loses leverage. The second movement is integration. This is widely misunderstood. Integration does not mean excusing the narcissist. It does not mean analyzing him further. It means reclaiming disowned traits. The right to say no. The capacity to withdraw. The refusal to justify boundaries. Jung warned that what is suppressed does not vanish. It governs from beneath awareness. The empath who denies anger becomes compliant. The empath who integrates anger becomes precise. He does not erupt. He discerns. He does not lash out. He limits access. In this stage, something shifts in posture, in tone, in energy. He feels less reactive, yet more alive. Less entangled, yet more present. Because he is no longer divided against himself. And a man who is no longer divided cannot be steered by guilt or fear. In the next part we will continue this sequence, moving into separation and embodiment, and expose the final difference between unconscious emotional feeding and conscious empathy, why one collapses under awareness and the other endures with strength. There is a point in this evolution where the empath stops being easy to predict. And predictability is the currency manipulation depends on. When someone knows exactly how you will respond, they can steer you. But when your reactions are no longer automatic, control begins to fail. At this stage something subtle but powerful occurs. The empath appears calmer, almost detached, yet internally he feels more grounded than ever. Less emotional chaos. More vitality. Less impulsive reaction. More deliberate presence. Because he is no longer divided inside. He is no longer disowning his darker impulses and projecting them outward. He carries his shadow consciously. And a shadow held in awareness does not destroy. It protects. Then comes separation. Not physical distance. Psychological distance. The empath stops translating his soul for someone committed to misunderstanding it. He stops debating obvious distortions. He stops chasing apologies that will never arrive. Jung described this as the withdrawal of projection, when energy once scattered outward returns to its origin. And when that happens, the narcissist feels something far more threatening than rejection. He feels insignificance. Not hatred. Not abandonment. Insignificance. Which is worse. That is why provocation often increases during this phase. Anger. Accusations. Emotional hooks thrown desperately into silence. Because even negative engagement restores relevance. But the empath is no longer available in that way. Not shut down. Complete. Then comes embodiment. The final shift. The change is no longer conceptual. It is physiological. His breathing steadies. His posture firms. His voice slows. He does not rush to fill empty space. He does not scramble to defend perception. He trusts his inner axis. Jung believed this is the moment when the self, not the ego, becomes the organizing center of the psyche. And from that position, manipulation does not land. It simply fails to register. Now the difference becomes clear. Psychological vampirism feeds on reaction. Conscious empathy functions from choice. One requires emotional supply. The other generates its own stability. The narcissistic dynamic collapses without access to reactivity. Conscious empathy remains intact without validation. The sovereign empath can feel deeply without dissolving. He can love without abandoning himself. He can witness pain without absorbing it. And that is why awakened empaths unsettle narcissists. Not because they attack. Because they cannot be consumed. This brings us to the final form. The integrated man. Jung never argued that psychological maturity meant being nice. He argued it meant becoming whole. Goodness without strength fractures under pressure. Strength without empathy corrodes into tyranny. But when empathy and strength converge, something rare emerges. Not a rescuer. Not a martyr. Not an aggressor. An empathic warrior. The empathic warrior does not wage war on others. He resolves inner fragmentation. He does not expose narcissists. He allows reality to expose them through irrelevance. Once the self becomes central, external turbulence loses authority. The empathic warrior does not need to dominate. He does not need to win debates. He does not need applause. His perception is internally validated. This is why narcissists eventually drift away from awakened empaths. Not because they were defeated. Because extraction is no longer possible. No admiration. No guilt leverage. No emotional volatility to exploit. Only steady presence. And presence cannot be manipulated. Jung spoke of the persona as a necessary mask in early development. But when the mask becomes identity, it becomes confinement. Narcissists live within performance. They must constantly curate image. They must constantly secure affirmation. They must constantly be reflected. The empathic warrior no longer needs reflection. He observes. And that steady gaze, unhurried and unreactive, destabilizes those who depend on illusion. Here lies the irony. The empath never pursued power. Power emerged the moment he stopped betraying himself. The fed-up empath is dangerous, not in behavior, but in effect. Dangerous to toxic systems. Dangerous to manipulation cycles. Dangerous to unconscious patterns. He no longer rescues dysfunction. He no longer rationalizes mistreatment. He no longer spiritualizes self-erasure. He exits environments that require him to disappear in order to belong. And structures built on self-abandonment cannot survive his absence. Jung wrote that the most frightening task is to accept oneself fully. The fed-up empath does exactly that. He accepts his anger. He accepts his limits. He accepts his refusal to be drained. From that acceptance emerges quiet authority. Not loud. Not theatrical. Unarguable. The final truth is simple. Empathy was never designed to mean endless sacrifice. It was meant to mean accurate perception. Sensitivity was not weakness. It was preparation. Preparation to detect subtle shifts. Preparation to see beneath performance. Preparation to recognize when connection becomes consumption. When that preparation is complete, the empath does not regress into innocence. He steps into truth. And truth does not shout. It does not persuade. It does not chase. It stands. If you have followed this journey to this point, this was not entertainment. It was recognition. And recognition is where freedom begins.